Congress going to be debating the use of those lovely TARP funds and whether there should be some strings attached or what strings ought to be attached, why were there not some strings attached, all the things that we've all talked about now for months. Bert Ely, Principal Ely & Company banking consultant, joins us on the fast line with his own view, Bert, with a long history in the banking industry. What is your view as to what Congress should do from here with this TARP money, Bert?
Well, I think the important thing is what they shouldn't do. I think there's a powerful temptation in the new Congress to try and put strings on the TARP money, specifically to mandate that banks that have received TARP money have to lend out and increase their lending by some multiple of that money. We've heard a number of suggestions along that line, and the unfortunate thing is that when these banks accepted TARP money, there was a provision in the contract governing that investment that said that the contract could be revised unilaterally by the government to reflect future statutory changes. What this means is Congress, at its will, this year, next year, or whenever, can rewrite the terms of this investment to include such things as credit allocation.
Right.
And that, I think, would be very, very damaging. As I said in my Wall Street Journal piece this morning, the important thing is to not put strings on that money.
So a couple of questions for you in that regard. First off, considering that all these banks, in effect, are bankrupt institutions propped up by taxpayer capital, Lehman obviously was the one that was allowed to go, but for my money, Morgan Stanley, Citigroup, Bear Stearns, they're all bankrupt in terms of how they ran themselves. They just happened to get better political favor or better timing or whatever it was, but institutionally they're no better off. Once they made the decision to basically take the taxpayers' money, why is it inappropriate for the taxpayer, as represented, perhaps poorly so, but as represented by the U.S. Congress, to not request some terms of use for that capital?
Well, first of all, a couple points on this. The government is not giving taxpayer money to these banks. It is making a dividend-paying investment. It expects to get the money back.
About which the U.S. taxpayer was never consulted, and the capital, of course, being utilized to assume massive amounts of risk so that a few people can make a few $1 billion for themselves and screw over the rest of America, right?
No, but that's an interesting way to characterize it. But these TARP investments are being made in sounder banks. There are banks that have been turned down for it, the weaker banks, that supposedly is a reason why national...
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Bert, but are you suggesting now that we should trust the individuals that created the structure of the failed banks to do the right thing? Now, in other words, we haven't even replaced the people that did this, and now you're making an argument for total trust in their judgment, which was obviously proven to be so very good in the fall of 2008.
Well, a lot of the banks that are getting this money are not those that have caused
that may be true, but the banks with most of the money are the banks that caused it. So while a lot of the banks getting the money may not have been the people with the judgment, the people with most of the money were the people with the bad judgment, no?
Well, without getting into names of the commercial banking industry...
Why not? They've got our money. The least we could do is, and it is a free press, the least we could do is talk about the people that run the banks. John Mack runs Morgan Stanley, right? Hank Paulson ran Goldman, go on. We know who the people are.
But the thing I think is important here is that the government's made these investments. The problem is if the Congress comes in and says, this is what you have to do with the money, it's going to be highly politicized. It'll be further distortion of the economy, and I think that's bad public policy. It would just further compound whatever sins exist.
But, Bert, the chances that Congress doesn't do that are slim and none, and Slim doesn't live in D.C. They're going to do this. These are the same guys who told the GM that they have to make a green car as the solution to their problem. Whether or not
they're also the same guys that made the credit default swap less regulated than a slot machine in Reno.
Suffice to say, collectively, not that sharp and not that knowledgeable about business. So they're going to do this. What scares you the most in terms of provisions they can tack on? Because I guarantee it's going to look like Gulliver's Travels. There's going to be strings on this.
We'll make this the last question, Bert.
Okay. What would really concern me is that they would say that you have to favor certain classes of borrowers. It's not just you have to increase your lending, but when you do, it would be certain classes. Let's say homeowners that are underwater on their homes. That would be really making things much worse.
Yeah. All right. If you were to attach one string, if you were to accept Jeff's premise, I know I just said this was the last question, but if you were to accept Jeff's premise that there are going to be strings attached, which string would least offend you?
Any string would offend me.
Well, but you have to accept the fact there are going to be strings because you've taken the money. What string would be least offensive, assuming you'll be offended no matter what?
No, I think that, first of all, what I've said to bankers is if any strings get put on, they ought to give the money back, and they have the right to do that. But no, I'm not going to concede this point. I would hope that Congress won't. There certainly needs to be strong pressure to do it. I hope it doesn't happen.
All right. Well, I hope it is. Bert, a pleasure. Thank you very much.